Before the age of the internet, critics and reviews didn't matter as much in some areas. Major critics in the beginning didn't like many rock bands. Metal was the same way. Industrial bands like Throbbing Gristle weren't understood. For a lot of bands like Throbbing Gristle, they simply didn't care if they were understood. Bands like that got off on the fact that they could alienate a lot of people. In turn, that also became part of their appeal. Word of mouth and even bad reviews that wondered how Second Annual Report could ever be called music brought people to Throbbing Gristle. Sometimes things are more intriguing if someone spends a few paragraphs trashing the music. If a critic had that much to say on the subject, it was obviously interesting enough to at least check out. When you have enough people opening their ears and continuing to do so, a fan base is garnered. Critics didn't like Kiss in the 1970s, but it didn't matter. Kiss sold millions of albums. Besides, part of being a Kiss fan, or a fan of any band for that matter, is having to hear from others why they think the band is bad. The purest rock and roll attitude was that critics represented the establishment. But when you have a fan base as big as the Kiss Army in the 1970s, the way you'd find out if the new single was good is if your friends liked it. You could sometimes sample the record at the record store before you took it home. Radio played new singles from hot bands, and if people liked it, they went out and bought the albums. Eventually, major reviewers would come around to some of the bands that they hated at first. Professional critics were brutal towards Rush in the 1970s. Though Rush still isn't for everyone, the critics have softened towards Rush over time. Not that it matters, with a die-hard fanbase such as the Rush fanbase, but about this softening, what happened? Some of the fans of this music became critics themselves. They know a good Rush album when they hear it, so they can probably also tell you if the latest Ozzy album is worth picking up. The music became popular enough to survive through community. People called in for radio requests. MTV got requests for music videos and often played the videos more if they knew that the ratings for that particular hour were good. Of course, there were also phone calls to friends, people recommended new bands, mixtapes got passed around, CDs were burned, and you could hear different things just riding in a car with someone. A passionate record store owner could tell you if a famous guitar player's solo album sucked and recommend something better. In a way, we're all critics. All it takes is saying, "This sucks," or "I exercise to this often." Again, it's a matter of community, and that is why reviews matter. Anyone can go on the internet and dissect an album. Maybe they can give a star rating based on established criteria, but why would anyone want to listen to it? If someone can guide you in the right direction and show you albums that you go insane for, you're going to want to hear more recommendations. Everyone's different though, so that's not to say that you're going to like everything someone else likes. A good reviewer will tell you straight up that they're not a fan of David Bowie's music before they review the Outside album. That shows you a potential bias, so whether you agree or not with their review, you at least know where they're coming from. Really, reviewers are personalities with their own limitations. The more you know about what someone likes and doesn't like, the better you can gauge whether you want to trust what they have to say. With so many people giving their opinions, you have to decide whose opinions are important in a sea of words. Caius, Blues for the Red Sun. It's considered a masterpiece in the stoner metal and desert rock subgenres, but even that album and Caius themselves have their own critics inside and outside the desert rock fanbase. But there's an audience for whatever you want to hear. So it's easier to say that if you like Nile, you'll probably be a fan of Origin. Listening to critics has to be taken at face value though. They're only somebody else's opinions. These opinions can be immensely valuable if they're going to lead you to the best albums you're ever going to hear, but what's more important is how you feel about what you're hearing. Sometimes it becomes less about the content of the music, and it's more for giving exposure to bands that need it. Unknown bands and big bands both get value from the word being spread of their creation. So much music gets released that it can be valuable to find a trustworthy source to tell you if a longtime band puts out a crappy album. That way you can pass it over and spend time with something more worthy. Every once in a while, a reviewer will come up with an expression or an idea that an artist runs with. In a review about Ministry's Twitch, the reviewer said that listening to Ministry is like having a 9-inch nail hammered into your head like a hole. A young Trent Reznor read this review, and he formed a band called 9-Inch Nails. You might have heard of them. Among other values reviews can have, goth music got its name from reviews. Bands like Joy Division, Bauhaus, and Susie and the Banshees were described as gothic in reviews. Even if some bands tried to fight the terminology, the label stuck. Often at the end of a band's career, or after an important member dies, you'll see reviews of a band's entire catalog. It could be coming from a newer fan, or a longtime fan that grew up with the albums. In the latter's case, you can appreciate how well the albums hold up in accordance with memories associated with the albums. In the former's case, you can get a more objective view that's closer to the present. Fewer memories are tied to these albums, so the review is more honest. Knowing where these reviewers stand in that regard puts things in perspective for you. If both types of reviewers say that Too Dark Park is an incredible album for its time and the present day, you can trust that the album is a masterpiece if you love industrial music. When old albums like that are reviewed and praised, it shows that Skinny Puppy still has value. With new music coming out constantly, why should we still talk about old albums? For one, the old albums sometimes give us a blueprint to compare newer music to. Sometimes things need reappraising. Some albums get better with age and some become obsolete. But it's also what keeps people listening to the music. Take Pink Floyd, The Dark Side of the Moon. If people stopped recommending the album to friends, if people stopped wearing the t-shirts, if nobody posted about it on social media, if websites stopped doing articles about it, if radio stations stopped playing it, new audiences wouldn't find it as easily. Of course, there are many ways people can find groundbreaking albums and music genres, but reviews are just another avenue to lead people towards them. The lesson here is, reviews are part of the music culture. They matter. They help the bands and the listeners. Of course, the review that matters the most is the listener's own review. Grind on.